Welcome to the BrainShape podcast, hosted by Dr. Andrea Wilkinson, a show where we cut through the noise of the ever-growing, ever-changing world of brain health. What works and what doesn't, what's fact and what's fiction. We look at tips, tools, and techniques backed up by real scientific studies to help you keep your brain healthy and hopefully have some fun along the way. Now, here's your host, Dr. Andrea Wilkinson.
You're listening to the BrainShape podcast, episode number 25. Our memories help make us who we are. Although the hippocampus, a specific part of our brain, is crucial for memory formation, memories are not stored in one specific area of the brain. In fact, strong memories often include sights, sounds, smells, and emotions. So really emotionally powerful memories will link many different areas of the brain together. Today, we're talking all about memory, the different types of memories that you have, how they're formed, and 3 tips you can use to boost your memory performance. Here we go. Here I am talking all about memory. If I asked you, what is memory? What would you say? Is it what you had for breakfast this morning or what you did last summer? So that's definitely one type of memory, but it's not all types of memory. So this specific type of memory is called episodic memory, and it's our memory for specific events that have taken place. In contrast, our memory for knowledge or concepts or facts is called semantic memories. So if I asked you what the capital of Canada was, that would be a semantic memory if you were able to correctly tell me that it was Ottawa. So there's those 2 different kinds of memory, semantic memory and episodic memory. And these memories refer to our abilities to code information and store it in our brains for later recall. And recalling a memory is just about retrieving the information that's associated with the memory. So I really want you to think about this for a second. What is it that you had for dinner last night? So I'll give you a minute to think about it. Think about exactly what you ate, where you were sitting, what it tasted like. Got it? Okay, great. So that was you recalling an episodic memory. It's your memory for the event of last night's dinner. We also have memory for the skills that we're able to manifest. So, for example, how to ride a bicycle or how to read or how to play a guitar. And this is a different kind of memory that's associated with skills and actions. And it's usually the case that we're not good at our skills at first when we learn about them, but it's through experience and practice that we get better. And these types of memories are called procedural memory. It's our memory for how to do things. Our memories help make us who we are. So whether it's through recognizing loved ones, recalling past joys, or remembering how to drive a car. Our memory is the chain that connects our past to our present. It's often the case that it's learning that's persisted over time. Our memory is the information that has been stored and can be recalled at a later point in time. So if we can think about how to really define memory, it isn't really an all or nothing type of thing. There's actually a really interesting case of a patient named HM who underwent surgery back in 1953. This case gave us so much information about how to understand memory, and I'll tell you why. The case of HM is so important because it taught us so much about how we have different types of memory and how those different types of memory are impacted by the hippocampus. So what happened is this patient named HM underwent surgery in 1953. He was around 26 or 27 years old, and the surgery was to remove part of his hippocampus because he was having epileptic seizures. The hippocampus is the part of our brain that's responsible for learning and memory. So when they removed this part of his hippocampus, they were able to reduce the experience of the seizures. I think he no longer had any more epileptic events. But after the surgery, HM had trouble forming new episodic memories. He couldn't remember new events that had taken place. So if he met someone for the first time after the surgery, he couldn't remember that individual after a little bit of time had passed. But interestingly, his procedural memory, so his memory for how to do things, was still intact. After the surgery took place, HM was not able to remember anyone new, even if he saw that person every day for 20 years. So he met up with his therapist every day and some researchers every day, and he was unable to remember them. Every time he saw them, it was as if they had met for the first time. So interestingly, though, the people that he knew, the relationships that he had before he underwent surgery, those relationships and his knowledge for those people was still intact. Same as if an event happened before the surgery had taken place. So just say it was his 15th birthday party and they went go-karting. He had the memory for that event because it had taken place before the surgery, but he had an inability to form new episodic memories. Interestingly, though, also is he was able to learn new skills because his procedural memory wasn't damaged. So if the researchers and the scientists taught him a new skill, a new procedural skill, he was able to learn that and then act on that learned behavior. As I mentioned, this case study of HM's taught the scientific community a tremendous amount about memory. The biggest lesson was that we have different types of memories. Memories for events, that's your episodic memory. So like an example of is what you had for lunch yesterday. And then our different memory is a memory for how to do things. So that's our procedural memory. And that's a memory, for example, how to play the piano or play the guitar or how to walk or ride a bike. And these different types of memory are controlled by different parts of the brain. And what was really interesting to learn about this case study from HM is that not all memories are stored in one specific area of the brain. They removed part of his hippocampus, and he still was able to remember events that had taken place before the surgery, but he was incapable of forming new episodic memories or new memories for events. But what's interesting is that we know now that our memories are not stored only in one specific area of the brain. And in fact, strong memories include so many different senses. They'll often include sight, sound, smell, emotion. And so it's really important to think about how our emotionally powerful memories will link many different areas of the brain together. So in neurodegenerative diseases like dementia, so for example, Alzheimer's disease, that's a specific type of dementia. The most prominent cognitive impairment that we see when we talk about Alzheimer's disease is we often first see deficits in episodic memory or our ability to form and remember new memories for events. This usually happens first and foremost. So for example, someone might forget where they parked the car at the mall, but they won't likely forget the lyrics to their favorite song. The lyrics to their favorite song is a memory that has been stored in this highly emotional way. So our memory for music is actually stored in so many different areas of the brain, and it's also highly emotional. And it's for that reason that we often don't see deficits in memory for music, or why it is that the case that we see memory for our favorite music persists for so long into the progression of dementia. Someone might forget what they had for breakfast this morning, or the event that happened the night before, who came over for dinner, but they won't forget. If you put on their favorite song, they'll remember the tune, they'll remember the lyrics. And that's because that music memory is so powerful and it's stored in so many different parts of our brain, and it's linked to so many different senses. It's linked to emotion and sound, and perhaps it's linked to some sort of image that's conjured up. And so it's super highly emotional, and it really sticks in our brain for a lot longer in a lot different way than our memory for what we had for breakfast this morning. Human memory involves the ability to both preserve and recover information that we've learned or experienced previously. And as we all know, this is not a flawless process. So sometimes we forget facts or events, or we misremember things. So sometimes things are not properly encoded in our memory in the first place, and this is perhaps why we remember them wrong. But memory problems can really range from minor annoyances like forgetting where you left your car keys to a major disease such as Alzheimer's disease that affects your quality of life and your ability to function every day in your daily living. So how are memories formed exactly? Well, in the late 1960s, psychologists Richard Atkinson and Richard Schifrin talked about memory formation in 3 stages. The first stage is encoding the information in the brain. The second stage is storing the information for future use. And the third stage is retrieving or recalling the information for later use. So according to this 3-stage model, memories first enter our brains as sort of fleeting sensory input. So if I ask you to remember the following words, are you ready? Here they are. I want you to remember these words: dog, watch, garden. I will say them again, and I want you to remember these words: dog, watch, garden. So the interesting thing is, what are you doing right now to try to encode that information? So most people will be repeating the information to themselves over and over again. Dog, watch, garden. Dog, watch, garden. And this is our way of encoding that information in this sort of sensory input. It's through the auditory words that we're trying to remember it. And if I ask you to recall those words quickly enough, they're readily available because you've been repeating them in your mind. They're in your working memory and they're ready to go. So what are the words? Dog, watch, garden. And this is really how you recall information briefly. So this is known as your short-term memory. And that is where your working memory comes into play, where you repeat words or repeat something that you need to recall over and over again, and it gets put into your short-term memory, and you're able to bring the information back up again if it's required or the information is called back relatively quickly. But just say that I want you to remember that list of words for even longer. I don't just want you to recall them after 30 seconds. I want you to recall them until later tonight or tomorrow. If that were the case, you would have to now think of a different type of strategy to use so that the information can be coded in an appropriate way and stored in your brain in a way that you are able to retrieve it and it's available in a usable form for a later process. And this is the process that's known as encoding. So what kind of information can I layer on top of these 3 words that can help me remember them for a later time? So perhaps I can create a really vivid story and some imagery in my brain about these words. So the words are dog, watch, garden. So I can conjure up the super vivid image of a dog wearing a watch in the garden. So he's sitting on the garden furniture. He's crossing his legs. He's wearing this big watch and he's sitting out in my parents' backyard. And so that's this really bizarre image that I've conjured up in my brain, but it will, because it's such a vivid and bizarre image, now all I have to do when I want to recall that information later is to conjure back up that image of the dog sitting cross-legged in the garden wearing a big watch. And I'll know the words that I need to remember are dog, watch, garden. The more bizarre the image, in fact, the more likely it is that you'll remember it for later use. So how long do memories last? Some memories are very brief, so they'll just last for seconds or milliseconds, while other memories can endure for much longer. They can last for days or weeks or months, decades, or even your entire lifetime. And most of these long-term memories lie outside of our immediate conscious awareness. But when you want or need the memory, you're able to bring them back to consciousness. So for healthy memories, there's a lot of little tricks you can use to help remember the information that you want to recall. And these strategies are called mnemonics or memory aids. And the vivid memory strategy that I just taught you to remember those 3 words, if you remember them, I'll give you a second to conjure them back up. You can conjure that vivid memory that I laid out for you. And you'll know the words are dog, watch, garden. So that is a mnemonic or a memory aid using that vivid imagery. But what are some other memory aids that you can use? So now I'd like to go over 3 memory strategies that you can use to improve your memory for events or your episodic memory. So my first tip is to convert words into pictures. So if you are tasked with trying to remember a list of words, my strategy for you is to picture the words as images instead. So according to research, we have better memory for pictures than we do for printed words. And it's been suggested that this occurs because we pay more focused, conscious attention to pictures than we do to printed words. Think about it. You can layer so many additional details onto an image that you can't layer onto a word. Think about the images that you gave that dog sitting in the garden that was wearing the watch. What color was the dog? How long was the dog's fur? What kind of watch was it wearing? So you've really conjured up this very vivid, detailed image that makes it hard to forget. And this effect has even been found in the oldest old adults. So adults who are between the ages of 90 and 97 years old also show this effect where they have better memory for pictures than they do for printed words. So if you ever need to remember a list of things, so for example, your grocery list, and you don't have a pencil or a piece of paper with you, try to imagine picturing those images in your head instead of trying to remember the words themselves. The second tip is to deeply encode whatever it is that you want to remember. You want to really process the information in a deep, profound way, and that will make it easier to remember. So according to research, we have better memory for words studied using deep encoding as compared to shallow encoding. So deep encoding occurs when the words are processed by relating information to other knowledge that you already have. For example, thinking about how useful objects might be on an uninhabited island. You are now taking this list of items and thinking through how useful or not useful they would be if you were stuck on a deserted island. So now you're using this way deeper way of encoding and processing the information. Versus shallow encoding occurs when you process words based on non-meaningful characteristics, such as a number of vowels or number of syllables. So let's say I gave you a list of words that I wanted you to remember, and then I gave you 2 minutes to remember that list of words. If I gave you that list of words to remember, and during those 2 minutes, I told you, go through this list and think about each item and how useful it would be on the deserted island, that's a form of deep encoding. You're going through the list, you're thinking about the item, you're now imagining yourself on this deserted island using the item that is the word that you're asked to remember and how useful or not useful it would be. You would remember those words far better than if I gave you another list of words and asked you for 2 minutes just to count the number of syllables that were in each word. And that's an example of shallow encoding. So in shallow encoding, we pay little attention to the meaning of the word and are only focusing on the physical characteristics of the word. So how many syllables it has or how many vowels are in each word. So In that way, we're unable to form these strong memories of the to-be-remembered words because it's really not processed in this meaningful way. But in the deep encoding example, where I asked you to look at the list of words and then think about how useful they would be on a deserted island, you had to pay a lot of attention to the word, the item that's associated to the word, the functionality of that word, how it would exist in the context of this deserted island, what use it would have on the island, what the uses could be or not be. Like, you have to get pretty creative. If I asked you, would you want a vacuum cleaner on a deserted island? You might have to think through some alternatives, and perhaps it would be useful in some context, or maybe you'd have to take it apart and use some of the pieces. But regardless, you're now deeply encoding this word vacuum cleaner and thinking through its application on the deserted island. And because we're now putting all of this attention on the meaning of the word and what the word represents and what the vacuum cleaner looks like, and we're sort of attaching it to this imagined experience, we're going to be a lot better able to remember the word at a later point in time. So, everyday application. So how could you use this strategy in an everyday type scenario? If I asked you to remember an address, or you're trying to remember an address for where you're going on Saturday, and the address is 1016 King Street, you can try to remember that address by attaching meaning or creating some sort of meaningful story around that address. So perhaps the ages 10 and 16 are relevant to you, so you can attach a meaning to that. Perhaps it's the age of your kids or your grandkids, 10 and 16 years old. Or you could make it a date. So the 10th month is October, so that could be October 16th. And what's the meaning behind that? The point is just to create some sort of meaning or value to the thing that you're trying to remember so that you can encode it in a deeper way. So the third and final memory strategy I'll give you is to create an environment that supports the formation of memories. So what do I mean by this? Research suggests that as we age, we become more susceptible to distractions in our environment. And in particular, studies have demonstrated that memory performance is disrupted when attention has to be divided between different tasks. Think about trying to remember information that you're reading in a magazine or the newspaper when the news is on in the living room and your partner's asking you about the dinner plans that you have for next Saturday, and the phone is ringing or it's blinking and notifications are going off. Your attention is getting pulled in so many different directions. It makes it so difficult to remember the information that you're reading in the magazine because your ability to code the memories becomes more difficult the more that your attention is divided. So in order to improve memory performance, it's important that you ensure that there are minimal distractions that are present in the environment and that your full attention can be devoted to what it is that you're trying to remember. So if you know that you want to remember the information that you're reading in that magazine or newspaper article, make sure you create an environment that's conducive to you encoding that information in a meaningful way. So make sure you're in a quiet space and you can focus your dedicated attention to the task at hand, which is figuring out some strategies that you can use to help you remember the information in that newspaper article. So it's all about minimizing your distractions, and that goes with whatever it is that you're trying to remember, whether it's you're trying to remember a phone number or an address, or focus on a conversation with a friend, or remember a new friend's name or that grocery list that you've created. You want to create an environment that you minimize distractions, where your attention can be focused solely on the task at hand, which is remembering the phone number, the friend's name, the grocery list, or whatever it may be. A lot of how much we remember depends on the time that we take to learn the information in the first place. So it's about how personally relevant or meaningful you make the information that you want to remember. And if you want to remember someone's name when you first get introduced to them, make sure you spend dedicated effort trying to remember that name. When you hear the name, attach it to something else that's meaningful to you so that you can recall it in an easier way at a later time. Memory is extremely powerful, but it takes dedicated attention for us to realize the full potential of our memory. And our memory is constantly shaping and reshaping your brain and your life and your identity. And so it's so important that you spend the attention that is required to be able to form memories in a meaningful way that makes them easier to retrieve and recall at a later date. And so I'll end with just one question. Do you remember the 3 words that I asked you to remember? Imagine that ridiculous image that you've conjured up of that dog sitting cross-legged in the garden wearing that watch, and you'll know what words we're talking about. If you've missed any of this, you can dive into the show notes for this episode and all past episodes at www.brainshape.ca/podcast. To access the show notes from today's episode specifically, just type episode 25 in the search bar and today's episode will pop right up. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that this episode gave you some important insights about the different types of memories that you have and some tips you can use to leverage your memory performance in your everyday life. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so that you'll be notified every time we publish a new episode. And since we're a weekly show, I'll see you back here next week. In the meantime, you can follow me on social media at BrainShapeTO and be sure to let me know if there are any specific topics that you want me to cover on the podcast. Until next time, keep your brain in shape. And as always, it's been such a pleasure hanging out with you.